The private helicopter descended through the afternoon sky, its blades slicing the peaceful silence of Willow Creek Valley like an unwelcome intruder. Dust swirled in small tornadoes across the landing area as the sleek black machine touched down on the makeshift helipad. Nothing more than a circle of white-painted stones in the middle of a sun-scorched field. Alexander Xander Reed squinted through designer sunglasses at the pastoral landscape stretching before him. His jaw clenched as he surveyed what would be his personal hell for the next 30 days. Fields, trees, and not a single five-star establishment in sight. The 34-year-old tech mogul, worth an estimated $12 billion, had just landed in the middle of nowhere, and he was already plotting his escape. "Sir, all your luggage has been transferred to the main house," his assistant's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Your schedule has been cleared as requested, though the board is requesting a video call next Wednesday." "Tell them I'll be unreachable," Xander replied, straightening his custom Tom Ford jacket as he stepped onto the dusty ground. His Italian leather shoes, worth more than what most of the locals probably made in a month, immediately collected a fine layer of dirt. "Dr. Preston was quite insistent on the terms of your retreat," the assistant reminded him diplomatically. Xander's scowl deepened. His private physician had been equally insistent about the impending heart attack he'd suffer if he didn't. Take this forced sabbatical. Stress reduction, they called it. As if abandoning his empire for a month to live like a peasant would somehow be relaxing. "I'm aware," he snapped, ending the call with a tap to his earpiece. The helicopter lifted off behind him, taking with it his last connection to civilization. Xander stood alone in the field, designer luggage at his feet, the late afternoon sun beating down mercilessly on his city-pale skin. "Well, don't you look like a fish flopping around on dry land?" The voice, warm but amused, came from behind him. Xander turned to see a woman leaning against an ancient red pickup truck parked at the edge of the field. She wore faded jeans with actual wear marks on the knees, boots caked with substances he didn't want to identify, and a plaid shirt with rolled-up sleeves revealing tanned, toned arms. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing a speck of makeup. "I'm Clara Bennett," she said, pushing off from the truck and approaching with an easy stride. "You must be Mr. Reed. Welcome to Bennett Farmstead." The hint of a smile played at the corners of her mouth as she extended a calloused hand. Xander hesitated before taking it. Her grip was firm, her skin warm from the sun. "How far is the main house from here? I need to set up my satellite office immediately." Clara's eyebrows shot up, her hazel eyes sparkling with barely contained laughter. "Satellite office? Mr. Reed, the closest reliable internet connection is in town, 20 miles away. Cell service is spotty at best." "That's unacceptable," Xander replied automatically. "I was assured this location would meet my basic needs." "Basic needs around here mean food, water, and shelter," Clara replied, picking up one of his suitcases, with surprising ease. "From the looks of you, I'm guessing your definition's a bit different." She tossed the suitcase into the truck bed with casual disregard for what was inside. "Careful!" Xander lurched forward. "That case alone cost more than my truck," Clara finished, patting the vehicle's rusted fender affectionately. "Probably. But my truck works just fine on these roads, and I'm willing to bet your fancy suitcase isn't built for farm life either." She reached for another bag, but Xander intercepted, clutching the leather handle protectively. "I'll manage this one," he said stiffly. "Suit yourself, city boy." Clara shrugged, climbing into the driver's seat. The truck's engine coughed too, life with a rumble that sounded alarmingly unhealthy to Xander's ears. As he reluctantly settled into the passenger seat, trying not to think about what the worn upholstery might be doing to his tailored trousers, Clara glanced sideways at him. "You know," she said, shifting the truck into gear, "most people come here to get away from all that." She gestured vaguely toward his phone, which he was frantically checking for signal bars. "I'm not most people," Xander replied without looking up. "No, Clara agreed, a smile touching her lips as the truck jolted forward onto a dirt road. That much is clear. The vehicle bounced violently over a pothole, sending Xander's head nearly into the roof. Clara didn't seem to notice, humming softly, as she drove with one arm casually draped out the open window. "Is there no proper road to this place?" he demanded, bracing himself against the dashboard. "This is the proper road," Clara replied cheerfully. "Just wait until you see the improper ones." As they crested a hill, the Bennett farmstead came into view, a sprawling property with a large, well-maintained main house, several outbuildings, and acres of farmland. In the golden afternoon light, even Xander had to admit, it held a certain rustic charm. "Home sweet home," Clara announced, "at least for the next month." "Wonderful," Xander muttered, already calculating how quickly he could convince his doctor that this experiment was a failure. Clara pulled up in front of the main house and cut the engine. "Dinner's at 6, family style. No phones at the table." She hopped out and grabbed his larger suitcase from the truck bed. "I'll show you to your room. Fair warning. There's a rooster named Colonel that likes to announce sunrise. Every single morning. I can have him removed," Xander suggested, only half joking. Clara shot him a look that could have withered crops. "Try it, and you'll find yourself sleeping with the pigs. Literally." As she marched toward the house, Xander found himself staring after her, caught between indignation and, though he'd never admit it, a grudging fascination. No one in his carefully curated world had spoken to him that way in years. 1 month, he reminded himself. He just had to survive 1 month in this backwater purgatory with this infuriating, refreshingly direct woman. How hard could it be? Alexander, Reed's first morning at Bennett Farmstead began at exactly 5:17 a.m., a time he previously knew only from the wrong side of all-night coding sessions. The culprit, as promised, was Colonel the Rooster, whose enthusiastic greeting to the new day sounded less like a cock-a-doodle-doo and more like a foghorn with aggression issues. Xander bolted upright in the unfamiliar bed, heart pounding, silk, pajamas damp with sweat. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then it all came rushing back. The doctor's ultimatum, the helicopter ride, and Clara Bennett's amused smirk. "Make it stop," he groaned, pressing a goose-down pillow over his head. But Colonel was just the opening act. As dawn broke across the cell, a symphony of animal sounds rose from the property. Bleating goats, lowing cows, and the distant bark of what sounded like an exceedingly enthusiastic dog. After 15 futile minutes trying to reclaim sleep, Xander surrendered to consciousness. The room, charming in a rustic sort of way, with hand-sewn quilts and hardwood floors worn smooth by generations of feet, felt oppressively quaint. He reached reflexively for his phone, then remembered Clara's warning that reception was practically non-existent. 30 more days, he muttered, dragging himself to the adjoining bathroom. At least the shower had decent water pressure, though. The hot water ran out precisely 7 minutes in, leaving him sputtering in an icy spray. By the time he emerged downstairs, dressed in what he considered casual wear, designer jeans that had been artfully distressed by someone paid handsomely to make them look worn, and a button-down shirt worth more than most people's weekly groceries, the kitchen was alive with activity. "Well, look who's finally up," Clara called from the stove, where she was flipping pancakes with practiced ease. "Sleep well, Your Highness?" Xander glowered at her. "Does that feathered alarm clock have an off switch?" "Colonel? He's been with us for 6 years. Best rooster we've ever had." She slid a plate stacked with pancakes across the kitchen island. "Breakfast." Despite his irritation, Xander's stomach growled. The pancakes smelled incredible, nothing like the protein-optimized smoothies his nutritionist prepared. "I don't usually eat carbs," he said, even as he slid onto a stool. "You do today," Clara replied, pushing a bottle of maple syrup toward him. "Real stuff, Not that corn syrup garbage. We tap the trees ourselves. An older woman entered from the back door, carrying a basket of fresh eggs. She had Clara's same warm, hazel eyes and confident bearing, though her hair was streaked with silver. "Mom, this is Mr. Reed," Clara said. "Mr. Reed, my mother, Eleanor Bennett." "Call me Ellie, dear," the woman insisted, setting down her basket, to offer a hand as work-worn as her daughter's. "Everyone does. We're not much for formalities around here." "Alexander," he replied, surprising himself with the concession. Nobody called him that. It was always Xander or Mr. Reed. But something about Ellie's genuine warmth made the formal walls he maintained feel suddenly unnecessary. "Well, Alexander," Ellie said, "I hope you brought proper clothes. Clara tells me you're built like a strong wind might blow you over." Clara snorted into her coffee cup. "I assure you, Mrs. Bennett, Ellie, I'm in excellent physical condition," Xander retorted, bristling slightly. "Oh, I'm sure you spend plenty of time in fancy gyms," Clara interjected. "But farm fitness is different. You use muscles you didn't even know you had." "And what makes you think I'll be doing?" "Farm work," Xander asked, cutting into his pancakes. The first bite was annoyingly delicious, fluffy, buttery, with just the right hint of vanilla. Ellie and Clara exchanged amused glances. "Your doctor called ahead," Ellie explained. "Said, you need physical activity and stress reduction. Something about your blood pressure being high enough to inflate a hot air balloon?" Xander nearly choked on his pancake. "That's confidential medical information. Not much stays confidential around here," Clara said with a shrug, "especially when Doc Preston is an old family friend who went to high school with my mom." "Wonderful," Xander muttered. "So what's on this mandatory farm fitness program?" Clara's smile was positively wicked. "We're mucking out the stables today." "I'm sorry, we're what?" "Cleaning horse poop," she translated helpfully. "About a ton of it. Really good for the biceps." "Absolutely not," Xander said flatly. "I have a company to run." "With what internet?" Clara challenged. "Besides, Doc's orders. You're here to disconnect. To experience real life instead of just moving digital money around." "I do significantly more than—" "Save your breath," Ellie advised, patting his shoulder. "When Clara sets her mind to something, there's no changing it. Bennett, women are stubborn as our mules." An hour later, Xander found himself in the stables, armed with a pitchfork and wearing a pair of overalls borrowed from Clara's brother that hung awkwardly on his leaner frame. His designer shoes had been unceremoniously replaced with rubber, boots that squeaked with every step. "This is Italian leather," he'd protested when Clara insisted he change footwear. "And that," she'd replied, pointing to the stable floor, "is grade A horse manure. Your choice which one you want to ruin." Now, watching Clara efficiently shovel soiled hay into a wheelbarrow, Xander felt utterly out of place. His usual domain was boardrooms and coding labs, where his mere presence commanded respect. Here, he was just a nuisance, an incompetent child needing instruction on the most basic tasks. "You're thinking too much," Clara said, interrupting his brooding. "It's not rocket science. Scoop and dump." "I have 3 advanced degrees," Xander muttered, jamming his pitchfork awkwardly into a pile of soiled hay. "And yet, completely useless with a pitchfork," Clara observed. "Funny how that works." Xander opened his mouth for a cutting retort when a massive horsehead appeared over the stall door beside him, snorting hot breath against his neck. He yelped, jumping sideways and nearly falling into the very pile he was attempting to clean. Clara's laughter echoed through the stable. "That's just Buckingham. He's curious about the new guy." "Keep your livestock contained," Xander snapped, heart racing as he regained his composure. "Livestock?" Clara's eyebrows shot up. "Buck is practically family, aren't you, big guy?" She stroked the horse's velvety nose with unmistakable affection. Buckingham nuzzled against her palm, then turned intelligent eyes toward Xander, as if assessing this strange, pitchfork-wielding intruder. "He doesn't like me," Xander observed, keeping his distance. "He doesn't know you," Clara corrected. "Horses sense fear and tension. You're practically radiating both." She held out a carrot. "Here, offer him this. Palm flat, fingers together." Xander hesitated, then reluctantly accepted the carrot. With trepidation, he extended his hand toward the massive animal, fighting the urge to snatch it back when Buckingham's soft lips tickled his palm, delicately retrieving the treat. "See? Not so scary," Clara said, and Xander was surprised to hear genuine encouragement in her voice rather than mockery. "I'm not scared of horses," he said automatically. "I've just never had reason to interact with them." "Well, now you do," Clara replied. She guided his hand to Buckingham's neck. "Feel that? Living, breathing creature. Not a digital simulation or spreadsheet. Real." Xander's fingers registered the warmth of the horse's coat, the subtle movement of muscle beneath, the steady rhythm of life. It was grounding, in a way he hadn't expected. "He's beautiful," Xander admitted quietly. "He is," Clara agreed, and when Xander glanced her way, he caught an expression of soft surprise on her face, as if she'd momentarily glimpsed something in him that didn't align with her assessment of billionaire jerk. The moment hung between them, fragile and unexpected. Then a goat bleated somewhere nearby, startling them both. Clara cleared her throat, stepping back. "Well, these stalls won't clean themselves. Better get to it, city boy." By afternoon, every muscle in Xander's body screamed in protest. His hands, unused to physical labor, had developed blisters despite the work gloves Clara had eventually taken pity and given him. Sweat soaked through his shirt, and bits of hay clung to his hair. "Not bad for your first day," Clara said, as they dumped the last wheelbarrow of waste onto the compost heap. "You only complained, 50 times?" 47, Xander corrected, then caught the teasing glint in her eye. "Very funny." "You're actually stronger than you look," she continued, ignoring his sarcasm. "Though that's not saying much." Xander straightened, stretching his aching back. "I do happen to work out regularly." "On machines with air conditioning and smoothie bars," Clara said. "Not quite the same." "Results are what matter," Xander replied, then couldn't help adding, "And my results are excellent." Clara's eyes flicked briefly to his torso, and Xander experienced the strange sensation of being physically appraised, not as a wealthy CEO, but simply as a man. "We'll see how those gym muscles hold up tomorrow," she said, a challenge in her voice. "We're fixing fences in the north pasture." "Joy," Xander said dryly, but found himself oddly looking forward to proving her wrong. As they walked back toward the main house, the setting sun painted the farm in golden hues. Clara pointed out various buildings and fields, explaining their purposes with evident pride. Despite himself, Xander found her passion for the place infectious. "You really love it here," he observed as they paused by a small pond where ducks glided peacefully across the surface. "It's home," Clara said simply. "Has been for 5 generations." "No desire to see the world, experience something bigger?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I've traveled some. College in Chicago, semester abroad in France. But this place, it gets in your blood. My roots are here." She glanced sideways at him. "What about you? Where's home for the great Alexander Reed?" The question caught him off guard. "I have properties in several cities." "Properties," Clara repeated, "not homes. Is there a difference?" "If you have to ask." She smiled, but there was something sad in it. "Come on, city boy. Let's get you cleaned up before dinner. You smell like the wrong end of a horse." As they continued walking, Xander found himself studying her profile, the confident set of her shoulders, the way the evening light caught in her chestnut hair. Clara Bennett was annoying, bossy, and completely unimpressed by his wealth and status. She was also, he realized with growing discomfort, the most authentic person he'd met in years. By his 5th day at Bennett Farmstead, Alexander Reed had developed a routine, albeit one he would never have imagined for himself a week earlier. He rose with Colonel's crowing, slowly growing accustomed to the early hour. He ate breakfast with the Bennetts, discovering that Eleanor's homemade bread rivaled anything from the artisanal bakeries he frequented in Manhattan. Then he followed Clara to whatever back-breaking task she had scheduled for him that day. Today, they were repairing fence posts in the north pasture. The April sun beat down with surprising intensity as Xander drove another post into the soft spring earth. "You're getting better at that," Clara observed, handing him the next wooden post. "Almost like you've done manual labor before." "I've always been a quick study," Xander replied, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. He'd abandoned his designer clothes after the second day, reluctantly accepting a wardrobe of worn jeans and flannel shirts borrowed from Clara's brother Daniel, who was away at veterinary school. "So I've heard," Clara said. "Boy genius, right? Started your company at 19, billionaire by 30. Xander paused, hammer mid-swing. "You've been researching me." Clara shrugged, unembarrassed. "Got curious after you mentioned Reed Tech. Looked you up next time I was in town at the library. Their internet connection is decent." "And what did you learn?" Xander asked, genuinely curious about her impression. "That you're exactly what I thought. Privileged kid from Connecticut, Ivy League dropout, built a tech empire." She positioned the next fence post, though the charity work was a surprise. Xander focused on hammering, uncomfortable with her mention of his foundation's work providing technology access to underserved communities. It wasn't something he publicized heavily. "It's good business sense," he said dismissively. "Tax advantages." Clara snorted. "Right, because building computer labs in rural schools across Appalachia is such a profit center." Before Xander could respond, a battered pickup truck appeared on the dirt road leading to their section of fence. Clara straightened, shading her eyes. "That's odd," she said. "That's Jeff Holloway's truck." "Another neighbor?" Xander asked, glad for the interruption. Conversations that veered toward his personal motivations always made him uneasy. "Sort of." Clara's voice had cooled considerably. "He owns Clearwater Development. Been trying to buy up land around here for years." The truck pulled to a stop, and a man in his 50s emerged. He wore pressed jeans, a button-down shirt, and a Stetson that looked too new, like someone playing cowboy rather than living it. 2 younger men in similar attire followed him out of the truck. "Clara Bennett," the man called, approaching with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Beautiful, as ever. How's your mama?" "Cut the sweet talk, Jeff," Clara replied, crossing her arms. "What brings you to our fence line?" Jeff Holloway's gaze shifted to Xander, taking in his borrowed clothes and work-roughened hands with obvious curiosity. "New farmhand?" he asked Clara. "Guest," she corrected tersely. "Alexander, this is Jeff Holloway. Jeff, Alexander Reed." Recognition flickered in Holloway's eyes. "Reed, the tech guy. Well, I'll be damned. What brings a big shot like you to our little corner of nowhere?" "Vacation," Xander replied simply, instinctively disliking the man's calculated folksiness. "Some vacation," Holloway laughed, gesturing to the fence posts. "Clara's got you working like a rented mule." Clara's jaw tightened. "You didn't answer my question, Jeff. What do you want?" Holloway's smile dimmed slightly. "Just being neighborly. Thought I'd share some news that might interest you." He pulled a folded document from his pocket. "County's approved my rezoning request for the old Miller property. Breaking ground on Clearwater Estates next month." Clara snatched the paper from his hand, scanning it quickly. This affects the watershed. Our watershed. Not according to the environmental impact study, Holloway countered smoothly. Everything's above board, Clara. 30 luxury homes, a clubhouse, maybe a golf course down the line. 30 homes? On that creekside land? Clara's voice rose. You'll be diverting water we depend on. Now, Clara. Holloway's tone was patronizing. I understand you folks are set in your ways, but progress is coming to this valley, whether you like it or not. The smart play would be to sell while land values are rising. Xander watched Clara's face flush with anger. He recognized the predatory business tactics at play, having employed similar methods himself in corporate acquisitions, though never, he assured himself, with small family operations. The Bennett farm isn't for sale, Clara said firmly. It never will be. Your mama might feel differently, Holloway suggested. Times are tough in agriculture. My offer still stands, 20% above market value for the eastern 100 acres. Just the non-productive land near the ridge. That land feeds our spring, Clara shot back, which waters our crops, and Mom agrees with me. Not an acre goes to Clearwater. Not now, not ever. Holloway's mask of friendliness slipped momentarily, revealing something harder beneath. Suit yourself. But when that beautiful old barn of yours needs a new roof, or that ancient tractor finally gives out, he shrugged eloquently. My door's always open. He tipped his hat, his gaze moving to Xander. Interesting company you're keeping these days, Ms. Bennett. Mr. Reed, if you're looking for investment opportunities in the area, give me a call. Some of us around here understand the value of progress. As Holloway and his men returned to their truck, Clara remained rigid, watching until they disappeared down the dirt road. I take it there's history there, Xander observed, breaking the tense silence. Jeff Holloway has been trying to turn this valley into a playground for rich weekenders for years, Clara said, her voice tight. Buying up struggling farms, building those soulless cookie-cutter luxury homes. The disdain in her voice when she said luxury made it clear what she thought of Holloway's idea of upscale living. And he wants your land specifically because location, water rights, the fact that we've told him no. Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. Probably all three. The Bennett farm sits at a crucial junction of Willow Creek. Controlling. Our water means controlling development potential for the entire Eastern Valley. Xander's analytical mind immediately grasped the strategic real estate play. Smart, he admitted. Ruthless, but smart. Clara shot him a sharp look. Don't tell me you're impressed. I recognize effective tactics, Xander replied carefully. It doesn't mean I approve. Right. Because billionaires are all about protecting the little guy, Clara muttered, gathering her tools with more force than necessary. That's not fair, Xander objected, surprising himself with how much her opinion suddenly mattered. You don't know anything about how I conduct business. I know your type, Clara retorted, but her voice lacked conviction. No, you don't. Xander caught her arm, turning her to face him. Clara, I've done plenty of things I'm not proud of in business, but I've never deliberately targeted family operations or manipulated environmental regulations. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, something electric passed between them, a current of unacknowledged attraction intensified by conflict. They stood close enough that Xander could smell the lavender soap she used, see the light dusting of freckles across her nose that only appeared in direct sunlight. Clara broke the connection first, stepping back. We should finish this section before dinner, she said, her voice carefully neutral. They worked in silence for nearly an hour, the encounter with Holloway hanging over them. Finally, as they loaded tools into Clara's truck, Xander spoke. Is the farm really in trouble? Clara secured the tailgate before answering. We're stable but tight. Agricultural margins keep shrinking and weather patterns are more unpredictable every year. She leaned against the truck, suddenly looking tired. Last season's drought hit us hard. We're recovering, but another bad year would be challenging. And the barn does need a new roof, Xander observed, remembering the patches of daylight visible through the rafters that morning. Clara managed a small smile. You noticed that, huh? I notice a lot of things. Well, Holloway noticed too, she said grimly. He's like a vulture circling, waiting for us to show weakness. Xander considered his next words carefully. I could help. Financially, I mean. Clara's expression hardened immediately. Absolutely not. It wouldn't be charity, Xander clarified quickly. An investment, a loan with favorable terms. No, Clara said firmly. The minute this farm takes money from an outsider is the minute we start losing it, piece by piece. She climbed into the driver's seat, effectively ending the conversation. Xander slid into the passenger side, frustrated by her stubbornness, yet grudgingly admiring it. Not everyone has ulterior motives, Clara. Says the man who described his own charity work as good business sense an hour ago, she countered, starting the engine with an aggressive turn of the key. Xander winced. She had him there. As they drove back to the main house, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising an evening storm. The weather matched Xander's mood, unsettled and brewing with conflicting emotions. That night, as rain lashed against the windows of the farmhouse, Xander sat at the small desk in his room, laptop open, though disconnected from any network. On the screen was the Reed Tech investment portfolio, specifically the real estate development, holdings. With a few keystrokes, he pulled up everything his company owned within a 100-mile radius of Bennett Farm. Then he searched for Clearwater Development in the company database. The results made his stomach tighten. 3 years ago, a Reed Tech subsidiary had provided seed funding for Holloway's company, part of a rural development initiative he'd barely paid attention to, just one of dozens of similar investments across the country. His company was financially backing the very developer threatening Clara's farm. Xander closed the laptop, rubbing his temples as Colonel's words from earlier echoed in his mind. Interesting company you're keeping these days, Ms. Bennett. Holloway had recognized him, which meant the developer likely knew exactly who was bankrolling his operation. Outside, lightning split the sky, momentarily illuminating the rain-drenched farm. In the brief flash, Xander caught sight of a figure hurrying from the barn to the house. Clara, her jacket pulled over her head against the downpour. Something tugged at his chest as he watched her dash through the rain. Something uncomfortably, like concern, or perhaps something deeper still. This was supposed to be a simple month of rural exile. Keep his head down, humor his doctor, then return to his real life. No complications, no entanglements. Instead, he found himself caught in a web of unexpected connections. The farm, Clara, Holloway. Somehow, in the span of less than a week, they had all become his business, his concern. And Alexander Reed wasn't entirely sure how he felt about that. Xander woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the darkness. The glowing numbers on the bedside clock read 2:17 a.m. Outside, the storm that had begun in the evening had intensified into something far more menacing. Wind howled around the eaves of the old farmhouse, and rain lashed against the windows with apocalyptic fury. What had woken him? He sat up, listening. There, a pounding at the door, followed by Clara's voice, urgent and clear even through the solid wood. Xander, get up. We need help. He was out of bed in an instant, grabbing the jeans and flannel shirt he'd draped over a chair. By the time he opened the door, he was halfway dressed, fumbling with buttons in the dim hallway light. Clara stood, before him, soaking wet and wide-eyed with urgency. The creek's flooding, she said without preamble. The eastern pasture fence is down. If we don't get the livestock to higher ground? She didn't need to finish. Xander might have been a city-bred tech CEO, but after a week on the farm, he understood the gravity of the situation. "Give me 30 seconds, said, turning back to pull on boots. Moments later, they were racing through torrential rain toward the barn, where Ellie was already harnessing an agitated Buckingham to a small wagon. "South pasture's still dry," she shouted over the storm. "We need to move the sheep first. They're closest to the rising water." Clara tossed Xander a rain slicker, which he gratefully pulled on. "You've ridden before, right?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Not exactly a skill requirement in Silicon Valley," he replied, rain streaming down his face despite the slicker's hood. "Today's your lucky day, then." She thrust a set of reins into his hands, connecting him to a sturdy chestnut mare. "This is Penny. She's steady and knows what to do better than you do. Follow my lead, stay in the saddle, and don't overthink it." Xander looked from the reins to the horse with trepidation. "There has to be a better—" "There isn't," Clara cut him off. "We need to split up. Mom's taking the wagon for the goats. I'm getting the cattle. You round up the sheep." She swung effortlessly into her own saddle atop a sleek black horse. "The pasture gate's already open. Just guide them through. Penny will help." Before he could protest further, Clara was gone, riding into the darkness with a confidence that left him both intimidated and oddly inspired. With an awkward scramble that bore no resemblance to Clara's fluid mounting, Xander found himself atop Penny, who turned her head to regard him with what he could only interpret as equine skepticism. "We both know I have no idea what I'm doing," he told the horse. "But those sheep need help, so let's pretend I do." To his surprise, once he gave Penny her head, the mare seemed to understand their mission perfectly. She picked her way confidently through the muddy fields toward the eastern pasture, where the beam of Xander's flashlight revealed a scene of chaos. The creek, normally a gentle trickle between grassy banks, had transformed into a roaring torrent that had already claimed several yards of pasture. In the distance, he could make out the huddled shapes of sheep, bleeding in distress as water encroached on their territory. "Okay, let's do this," Xander muttered, more to himself than to Penny. What followed was 30 minutes of the most physically and mentally demanding work of his life. Penny seemed to know instinctively how to herd the panicked sheep, while Xander concentrated on staying in the saddle and following Clara's shouted instructions whenever she rode within earshot. The rain was relentless, reducing visibility to mere feet. Twice, Xander nearly lost his seat as Penny made sharp turns to head off escaping sheep. His muscles burned with the effort of remaining upright, his hands raw from gripping the reins. But gradually, impossibly, they began making progress. One by one, then in growing groups, the sheep moved toward the south pasture gateway, their white forms ghostly in the darkness. "You're doing it!" Clara shouted as she raced past, directing a small herd of cattle through a separate gate. The approval in her voice sent an unexpected surge of pride through Xander's chest. Finally, the last sheep crossed to safety. Xander slumped in the saddle, exhausted and drenched, but filled with an unfamiliar sense of accomplishment. This wasn't closing a billion-dollar deal or developing breakthrough technology. It was something more primal, directly saving living creatures from danger. He guided Penny toward the barn, where light spilled from the open doors. Inside, Ellie was counting goats while Clara unsaddled her horse. "All accounted for?" Ellie asked, as he dismounted with considerably less grace than he'd have preferred. "I think so," Xander replied, his legs wobbling uncertainly beneath him. 37 sheep, unless I miscounted in the dark." 38, Clara corrected, approaching to help him with Penny's saddle. "But that's easily done in a storm." Her hands brushed against his as she took the reins, and despite the cold rain, warmth spread through his fingers at the contact. "Not bad for your first time on horseback," she added, her voice softer than he'd yet heard it. Most city folks would have run screaming back to the house. The thought crossed my mind, Xander admitted, rubbing his sore thighs. Several times, actually. Clara smiled, a real smile, not the sardonic one he'd grown accustomed to. But you didn't. The sheep needed help, he said simply. Something shifted in Clara's expression, a subtle softening around the eyes, an unguarded moment of reassessment. For the first time since his arrival, she was looking at him not as an interloper or an inconvenience, but as… what? An ally? Maybe even a friend? The moment was broken by a tremendous crash from outside. They rushed to the barn doors to see that the old oak tree near the equipment shed had finally surrendered to the storm, its massive trunk now blocking the main path to the house. That's gonna be fun to clear tomorrow, Ellie sighed, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. If the rain stops, Clara added grimly. The forecast said this could last through morning. Xander checked his watch, nearly 4 a.m. We should try to get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. They secured the barn, ensuring all animals were safely sheltered, then made their way back to the house via a circuitous route around the fallen oak. By the time they reached the porch, Xander was limping slightly, his unused riding muscles protesting every step. In the kitchen, Ellie insisted on hot chocolate despite the hour, claiming it was Bennett emergency protocol. Too exhausted to argue. Xander accepted the steaming mug gratefully, sinking into a chair at the worn kitchen table. Thank you, Ellie said quietly, as Clara momentarily left the room to fetch dry towels. For helping tonight. I didn't do much, Xander demurred. Penny did all the work. That's not how Clara tells it. Ellie's eyes, so like her daughter's, regarded him thoughtfully. She said you took to it like you'd been farming your whole life. Xander nearly choked on his hot chocolate. She said that? Well, Ellie amended with a small smile. What she actually said was, the billionaire didn't completely embarrass himself. But from Clara, that's high praise. Before Xander could respond, Clara returned with towels and fresh clothes for them all. As she passed him his bundle, their eyes met, and the connection from earlier reestablished itself, something unspoken, but undeniably present passing, between them. You should get those wet clothes off, she said, her voice deliberately casual. Can't have you catching pneumonia. We've got fences to repair tomorrow. Heaven forbid anything delay the chore schedule, Xander replied dryly, but without the edge that would have accompanied such a comment days ago. Clara's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. The mud waits for no man, Reed. Not even a tech genius. As Xander climbed the stairs to his room, muscles aching from unaccustomed exertion, he realized something startling. He hadn't thought about his company, his phone, or his usual life in hours. The storm and its aftermath had demanded his complete presence in a way board meetings and product launches never did. More surprising still was the discovery that he'd enjoyed it. Not the danger or the discomfort, but the immediacy of the work, the clarity of purpose, the unexpected camaraderie with Clara and Ellie. In his room, he peeled off his sodden clothes and pulled on the dry ones Clara had provided, another set of her brother's things, worn soft with age and use. As he dressed, his mind returned to the revelation of the previous day, his company's connection to Holloway and Clearwater development. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Xander made a decision. First thing in the morning, storm or no storm, he would find a way to get to town and use the library's internet connection. He needed to contact his office to understand exactly what his company's involvement with Holloway entailed. And then he needed to decide whose side he was really on. Because somewhere between mucking stables and herding sheep in a midnight storm, Alexander Reed had begun to care about Bennett Farm, and though he wasn't quite ready to admit it, about the fiercely independent woman who called it home. Morning brought watery sunshine and the aftermath of the storm's fury. Trees had fallen across several sections of the property, and the creek, though receding, had carved new channels through the lower pasture. By the time Xander came downstairs, Clara was already at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and looking uncharacteristically worried. "That bad?" he asked, pouring himself coffee from the pot on the stove. Clara glanced up, momentarily startled from her thoughts. The storm took out the main fence along the creek, damaged the equipment shed roof, and we've got standing water in the eastern field. She pushed a hand through her hair, which was pulled back in its usual practical ponytail. But that's not the worst of it. She slid a letter across the table to him. Xander scanned it quickly, his expression darkening as he read. "The county's reassessing water rights?" he asked, looking up sharply. Clara nodded grimly. "Holloway's doing. He's claiming the storm damage proves our section of the creek needs professional management for flood control." She made air quotes around the words, her voice bitter. "It's a legal maneuver to get control of our water. If the assessment goes his way, he could effectively dam our section of the creek, leaving us high and dry during summer months." Xander frowned, rereading the letter. His years navigating corporate legal battles had taught him to recognize predatory tactics. This is backdoor condemnation. He's using environmental regulations as a weapon. "Exactly," Clara confirmed, something like respect, flickering in her eyes at his quick understanding. "We've managed that creek for generations. One storm doesn't change that." "Where's your mother?" Xander asked, glancing around the unusually quiet kitchen. "Gone to town to talk to our lawyer." "What? Passes for one around here anyway." Clara's shoulders slumped slightly. "Frank Gilmore's been the family attorney for 30 years, but corporate water rights aren't exactly his specialty." Xander set down his coffee mug with sudden determination. "I need to get to town today." Clara looked up, surprised by his tone. "I was planning to drive in this afternoon to check on Mom and pick up supplies. The roads should be clear by then." "Good. I'm coming with you." Xander hesitated, then added, "There's something I need to tell you, Clara, about Holloway, about my company." Her eyes narrowed. "What about your company?" Xander took a deep breath. "Reed Tech has a connection to Clearwater Development, a financial one. I didn't know until last night. It's a subsidiary investment, several corporate layers removed from my direct oversight. But it exists." Clara's face went completely still. "You're funding the man trying to destroy my farm?" "Not intentionally," Xander said quickly. "It was part of a rural development initiative. I had no idea Holloway was targeting family farms or manipulating water rights." She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the wood floor. "Were you ever going to mention this?" "I'm mentioning it now," Xander pointed out, keeping his voice even. "As soon as I confirmed it. And I'm going to fix it." "Fix it?" Clara scoffed. "How exactly? Write a bigger check to Holloway? Buy the farm out from under us with a generous offer?" "Clara," Xander said, rising to face her. "In the week I've been here, have I given you any reason to think I'd do that?" The question hung between them, charged with everything unspoken since the night before. The way he'd ridden out without hesitation to help save the animals, how they'd worked side by side through the storm, the moments of genuine connection that had begun to form between them. Clara's anger visibly faltered, uncertainty replacing it. "I don't know what to think," she admitted finally. "A week ago, you were just another rich guy who thought manual labor was beneath him. And now?" Xander pressed gently. Clara looked away, her profile outlined against the morning light streaming through the kitchen window. "Now you're complicated." Before Xander could respond, the phone in the hallway rang. Clara moved to answer it, leaving him standing by the table, oddly encouraged by her assessment. Complicated wasn't trustworthy, or even likable, but it was miles from where they'd started. When Clara returned, her expression was grim. That was Mom. Holloway's called an emergency meeting of the county water board for tomorrow morning. They're fast-tracking the reassessment. That's not legal, Xander protested. There are notification requirements, public comment periods. Welcome to small-town politics, Clara said bitterly. Holloway's brother-in-law chairs the water board. Xander's mind raced through possibilities. We need to get to town. Now. I need internet access. And we need to talk to your lawyer. We? Clara repeated. Yes, we, Xander said firmly. I told you I'm going to fix this, Clara. For the next 3 weeks, I'm a Bennett farmhand, which means Holloway is my problem too. Something shifted in Clara's expression. A softening, a moment of vulnerability quickly masked. But she nodded. Let me get my keys. As they headed for her truck, Xander realized with crystal clarity that his forced vacation had become something else entirely. What had begun as an unwelcome exile had transformed into a mission, one that involved far more than saving his own health or even a historic family farm. It involved saving something he hadn't realized he was missing until he'd found it here, among the sheep and horses and stubborn, principled farmers. Something about purpose, about roots, about connection. And perhaps most dangerously of all, it involved his growing feelings for a woman who represented everything his life in tech had taught him to dismiss: tradition, attachment to place, reverence for things that couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports or user metrics. As Clara's truck bounced down the rutted drive toward town, Xander stole a glance at her profile. Determined, proud, worried, but unbowed. Whatever happened with Holloway and the water rights, he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. For the first time in years, Alexander Reed wasn't following a strategic plan or optimizing for efficiency. He was following his heart. The Willow Creek Public Library was housed in a quaint brick building that had once been the town's bank. Despite its modest size, it offered something Xander had been craving for over a week: reliable internet access. You've got 2 hours, Clara told him as she led him to a small study room in the back. I need to meet Mom and Mr. Gilmore at his office, then pick up supplies at the feed store. That should be enough time, Xander replied, already pulling out his laptop. I'll meet you at the lawyer's office when I'm done. Clara hesitated in the doorway. Are you sure about this, Xander? Getting involved in our fight with Holloway could have consequences for you and your company. Her concern surprised him. A week ago, she would have relished the idea of him facing corporate blowback. Now, there was genuine worry in her eyes. I'm sure, he said firmly. What Holloway's doing is wrong, and my company's inadvertent involvement makes it my responsibility. Clara studied him for a moment, as if searching for the catch, then nodded. 2 hours, she repeated, and was gone. Alone in the quiet room, Xander connected to the library's Wi-Fi and dove into the Reed Tech systems. After 9 days without access, he had thousands of emails and notifications. But he ignored them all, focusing instead on tracing the connection between his company and Clearwater Development. The rabbit hole went deeper than he'd initially thought. 3 years ago, Reed Tech's venture capital arm had invested in a regional economic development fund, which in turn had provided financing to Holloway's company. On paper, it was exactly the kind of investment Reed Tech publicized as supporting rural entrepreneurship. In reality, it had empowered a predatory developer to target vulnerable farming communities. Xander's jaw clenched as he uncovered internal communications showing that Holloway had specifically mentioned Bennett Farm in his investment prospectus, identifying it as a key acquisition target due to its water rights. Son of a bitch, Xander muttered, straightening as another realization hit him. His required stress reduction retreat at Bennett Farm hadn't been a coincidence. Holloway must have recognized the opportunity when Xander's doctor, an old friend of Ellie Bennett, had recommended rural relaxation. What better way to smooth the path for acquisition than having the CEO of Clearwater's biggest investor witness firsthand the struggles of a small farm? Except the plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of seeing an obsolete operation ripe for development, Xander had discovered the soul and significance of Bennett Farm and had begun to care deeply for the woman fighting to preserve it. His next steps became clear. With focused intensity, Xander drafted emails to his executive team, instructing them to freeze all funding to the Regional Development Fund pending a full audit. He also requested comprehensive background checks on Holloway and the county water board members. As a tech CEO, Xander had cultivated a reputation for ruthless efficiency when necessary. Now he directed that same calculated precision toward Holloway's operation. His final email was to Reed Tech's chief legal counsel, Sydney Park. Sydney, need immediate intervention on situation in Willow Creek Valley. Reed Tech subsidiary inadvertently funding problematic real estate development. Environmental regulations being weaponized against family farm. Water rights manipulation. Political connections exploited. Emergency hearing tomorrow morning. Need you here. Sending coordinates. Private jet authorized. Bring environmental team. This is personal. Priority Alpha. Xander. He hit send, then checked the time. Clara would be waiting. Packing up his laptop, Xander hurried from the library toward the small cluster of professional offices on Main Street. Frank Gilmore's law practice occupied the second floor of a Victorian building above the town pharmacy. When Xander entered the cramped waiting room, he found Clara and Ellie huddled, with an elderly man whose bow tie and suspenders seemed lifted from another era. "I just don't see how we can block it, Ellie," the lawyer was saying. "The regulation allows for emergency reassessment after significant weather events." "But they're manipulating the process," Clara argued. "The storm damage doesn't justify." She broke off as she noticed Xander. "You're late." "Sorry," he replied, then extended a hand to the lawyer. Alexander Reed. Gilmore's bushy eyebrows shot up in recognition. "The tech fellow. Heard you were staying out at Bennett Farm." He shook Xander's hand vigorously. "Frank Gilmore, Esquire. Been representing the Bennetts since Eleanor's father ran the place." "Mr. Gilmore thinks we're fighting a losing battle," Ellie said quietly. "With all due respect," Xander replied, setting his laptop on Gilmore's cluttered desk. "I think there's another approach we haven't considered." For the next hour, Xander outlined a multi-pronged strategy that left even Gilmore looking impressed. They would challenge the emergency hearing on procedural grounds, file for an injunction based on historical preservation statutes, and, most importantly, reveal Holloway's pattern of manipulating environmental regulations for private gain. "My legal team will be here by morning," Xander concluded. "They're specialists in corporate environmental law, but they'll need local counsel, someone who knows the history, the people, the precedents." Gilmore straightened his bow tie, a new fire in his eyes. "I might be old school, but I know every legal decision in this county going back 50 years. Been waiting decades to take on those Holloway boys." Clara had watched Xander throughout his presentation, her expression shifting from skepticism to cautious hope. Now, as they filed out of Gilmore's office, she fell into step beside him. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," Xander replied. "My company enabled Holloway, even if unintentionally." "Is that the only reason?" Clara asked, stopping on the sidewalk to face him directly. Their eyes met, and Xander felt the pretenses between them growing thinner by the moment. "No," he admitted. "It's not the only reason." Something electric passed between them, but before either could speak further, Ellie called from the truck. "If we're going to be ready for this hearing tomorrow, we need to get back to the farm and finish. Those repairs, daylight's wasting." The drive back to Bennett Farm was largely silent, each of them processing the events of the day and the battle that lay ahead. As they crested the hill overlooking the property, the farmhouse came into view, golden in the late afternoon light. "It really is beautiful," Xander said softly. Ellie glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Been in the family since 1887. My great-great-grandfather built that house with his own hands after coming back from the war." "The farm's more than land," Clara added from the passenger seat. "It's Continuity, a living connection to the past. Xander thought about his own rootless existence. Luxury apartments and hotel suites, each indistinguishable from the last. He owned properties across the globe, but couldn't recall the last time he'd thought of any of them as home. "I understand," he said, surprising himself with how genuinely he meant it. They spent the remaining daylight hours repairing storm damage, mending fences, clearing debris, reinforcing the creek banks. By sunset, they were muddy, exhausted, and oddly satisfied. As darkness fell, Clara led Xander to the eastern ridge, where a massive oak had partially uprooted during the storm. "We'll need to decide if it can be saved," she explained, examining the exposed roots. "It's been here longer than the house." Xander circled the ancient tree, assessing the damage. "The root system is still mostly intact. With proper bracing and soil reinforcement, it should recover." Clara looked at him with surprise. "How do you know about tree rescue?" Xander ran a hand along the oak's massive trunk. "My grandfather had an orchard in Connecticut. Small operation, nothing like this farm. I spent summers there as a kid, before..." He trailed off. "Before what?" Clara prompted gently. "Before my father decided agriculture wasn't a strategic industry and sold the land to developers," Xander finished, old pain lacing his voice. "I was 12. It became a golf course community." Understanding dawned in Clara's eyes. "That's why this matters to you, beyond your company's connection to Holloway." Xander nodded, surprised at how easily the truth emerged after being buried for so long. "I never thought about it consciously, but yes. Watching my grandfather lose his land that had meant everything to him, it shaped me more than I realized." Clara stepped closer, her face shadowed in the fading light. "And what did you learn from it?" "That progress has costs. Real costs. Not just the ones that show up on balance sheets." He met her gaze directly. "My whole career, I've preached technological advancement as an unqualified good. But being here, seeing what you've built and maintained across generations, it's making me question things I've taken as gospel." "Like what?" Clara's voice was barely above a whisper now. "Like the idea that newer is always better. That tradition is just a polite word for obsolescence." Xander smiled faintly. That a woman who talks to horses and worries about ancient oak trees couldn't possibly have anything to teach a tech billionaire. A soft laugh escaped Clara, and she ducked her head slightly. "Well, I've learned a few things too. Such as that a man in Italian leather shoes can actually learn to muck stables." Her smile turned mischievous. Eventually, they stood together under the wounded oak, the tension between them shifting from adversarial to something much more dangerous. For a breathless moment, Xander thought Clara might lean toward him, closing the final distance between them. Instead, a flash of headlights swept across the ridge as a vehicle turned into the farm's long driveway. "That'll be your legal team," Clara said, stepping back. "Probably," Xander agreed, irrationally annoyed at their timely arrival. They walked back toward the house in companionable silence, shoulders occasionally brushing. At the porch steps, Clara paused. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Xander, thank you for trying. Most people wouldn't have gotten involved." "I'm not most people," he replied, echoing the words he'd spoken so arrogantly on his first day. Clara's smile told him she recognized the callback. "No," she agreed softly. "You're definitely not." The county administrative building was an austere concrete structure that seemed at odds with Willow Creek's otherwise charming architectural character. By 8:30 the next morning, its largest meeting room was filled with local farmers, curious townspeople, and a conspicuous cluster of suits that hadn't been purchased anywhere within 100 miles. Sydney Park, ReedTech's chief counsel, had arrived at dawn with a team of 4 specialists and enough documentation to wallpaper the farmhouse. An elegant Korean-American woman in her 50s with a reputation for surgical precision in the courtroom, Sydney had raised an eyebrow at finding her, CEO in mud-stained work boots and flannel, but had simply said, "This must be quite the farm." Now, as they waited for the hearing to begin, Sydney slid a tablet across the table to Xander. "Thought you'd want to see this first," she murmured. Xander scanned the document on screen, his expression hardening. It was an internal Clearwater development memo outlining their strategy to acquire Bennett Farm, including plans to manipulate the water board assessment and create challenging conditions that would force the Bennetts to sell. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "Let's just say Holloway's IT security is significantly less robust than his ambition," Sydney replied with a thin smile. "And he really should be more careful about what he puts in writing." Holloway entered the room then, flanked by his own legal team. His confident smile faltered momentarily when he spotted Xander and Sydney at the Bennett's table. The hearing began with procedural matters, then moved to Holloway's petition for emergency, water rights reassessment. His argument, delivered by a slick attorney in a $1,000 suit, focused on the recent storm damage and alleged historical mismanagement of the creek by the Bennett family. Frank Gilmore countered with a passionate, if somewhat rambling, defense of the Bennett stewardship. Though heartfelt, it was clear from the water board members' expressions that sentiment alone wouldn't carry the day. Then Sydney Park rose. What followed was a masterclass in corporate legal warfare. Sydney methodically dismantled Holloway's claims, presenting historical rainfall data, independent environmental assessments, and testimony from conservation experts. She revealed that similar tactics by Clearwater had been challenged in 3 other counties, resulting in settlements that were sealed by non-disclosure agreements. But the most compelling evidence, Sydney concluded, comes from Clearwater's own internal communications. The room fell silent as she projected Holloway's memo onto the large screen at the front of the room. As attendees read the damning words, gasps and murmurs spread through the audience. "This isn't just about water rights," Sydney told the board. "This is about a systematic effort to weaponize environmental regulations against the very family, farms that have maintained this land for generations. Reed Tech withdraws all support for Clearwater development, effective immediately, and requests that this board dismiss the petition and open an investigation into Mr. Holloway's business practices." Holloway surged to his feet. "This is outrageous. That document is stolen property." "Actually," Xander interjected calmly, standing to address the board, "as CEO of Reed Tech, a major investor in Clearwater, I had every right to request and review internal documents pertaining to investment strategies." He turned to face the room, making eye contact with the assembled farmers. "My company invested in Clearwater believing it represented responsible rural development. Instead, we discovered predatory tactics targeting family farms like the Bennetts. That ends today." Clara, seated beside him, touched his arm gently, a simple gesture of gratitude that sent warmth spreading through his chest. The water board chair, Holloway's brother-in-law, looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should adjourn to consider—" "With respect," Frank Gilmore interrupted, finding new confidence. "The law is clear. The petition must be dismissed, and all water rights restored to their historical allocation. Anything less would constitute an abuse of regulatory authority that, if I may speak plainly, would not survive judicial review." After a tense deliberation, the board voted 4-1 to dismiss Holloway's petition and maintain the Bennett's water rights. The lone dissenting vote came from Holloway's brother-in-law, whose red-faced fury suggested family dinners would be awkward for the foreseeable future. As the room emptied, Holloway cornered Xander near the exit. "You've made a powerful enemy today, Reed," he hissed. "Your shareholders won't appreciate this interference in a profitable investment." Xander smiled coldly. "Actually, our ESG committee will be thrilled. Nothing says corporate responsibility, quite like preventing rural land grabs. I'd worry more about your own investors, Jeff. I doubt they'll appreciate the legal scrutiny coming your way." Holloway stormed out, leaving Xander face to face with Clara, who had witnessed the exchange. "ESG committee?" she asked, one eyebrow raised. "Environmental, social, and governance," Xander explained. "It's a real thing, though I admit I've never paid much attention to it before." He smiled ruefully. "I might need to attend those meetings. More regularly now." Clara shook her head, a mix of amusement and something deeper in her expression. "You are full of surprises, Alexander Reed." "Good surprises, I hope," he replied. Instead of answering, Clara reached up and straightened his collar, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "We should get back to the farm. Mom's planning a celebration dinner, and there's still work to do before sunset." As they walked to Clara's truck, Sydney fell into step beside them. "I've never seen you like this, Xander," she observed quietly. "Like what?" Sydney smiled knowingly. "Happy, unburdened." Her gaze flickered to Clara, who was walking ahead with Ellie and Frank. "It suits you." Before Xander could respond, she handed him a folder. "The documents transferring Reed Tech's shares in the regional fund to a conservation trust. Sign when you're ready." She glanced around at the small town square, the rolling hills beyond. "I get it now. Why you've gone radio silent out here. Some connections matter more than business." With that enigmatic statement, she rejoined her legal team, leaving Xander to ponder her words as he climbed into Clara's truck for the drive home. Home. When had he started thinking of Bennett Farm that way? As they drove through the dappled afternoon light, Clara reached across the seat and briefly squeezed his hand. "Thank you," she said simply. Xander turned his palm to catch her fingers, holding them lightly. "You're welcome." They rode the rest of the way in silence, hands entwined, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. Something neither was quite ready to name, but neither could deny. The future suddenly seemed full of possibilities Xander had never considered. And for the first time in years, he wasn't trying to calculate probabilities or optimize outcomes. He was simply living in the moment, hand in hand with a woman who had challenged everything he thought he knew about what really mattered. 3 weeks after the water board hearing, Alexander Reed stood on the porch of Bennett Farmhouse, watching the sunrise paint the valley in shades of gold and amber. Colonel, now practically a friend, announced the new day with his usual enthusiasm, but this morning the sound carried a bittersweet quality. Today was Xander's last day at Bennett Farm. His doctor-mandated rural retreat had accomplished its purpose. His blood pressure had dropped to healthy levels, and the constant headaches that had plagued him for months had vanished. Physically, he was transformed. The city pallor had given way to a healthy tan, and muscles earned through actual labor had replaced the carefully sculpted gym physique he'd arrived with. But the external changes paled in comparison to the internal ones. "Penny for your thoughts?" Clara's voice came from behind him. She joined him at the railing, 2 steaming mugs in hand. She passed one to him, their fingers brushing in a now familiar way that still sent electricity through his system. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Xander admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. 4 weeks ago, I was furious about being exiled to this backwater, as I so charmingly put it. Clara smiled, the early light catching in her hair. "And now? Now I'm trying to figure out how to say goodbye to it." He turned to face her directly. "To you." The days following the hearing had transformed their relationship. The tentative connection had blossomed into something neither had anticipated. Days filled with shared work and laughter. Evenings spent on this very porch talking until the stars emerged, learning each other's stories, discovering the unlikely bridges between their disparate worlds. There had been a first kiss too, 3 days after the hearing as they'd repaired the old oak's root system together. Clara had smeared mud on his cheek. He'd retaliated. And somehow the playful moment had crystallized into something else entirely, concluding with her in his arms, her lips soft against his. The ancient tree, a fitting witness to something new taking root. "You know," Clara said, gazing out at the farm waking up around them. When you first arrived, I had you pegged as another entitled rich guy who'd run screaming back to his penthouse the minute things got difficult. To be fair, I nearly did, Xander admitted with a laugh, especially after that first stable mucking session. But you didn't. Clara turned to him, her expression serious now. You stayed. You helped. You changed. You changed me, Xander corrected gently. Clara shook her head. No. The capacity was always there. The boy who loved his grandfather's orchard, who understood the value of roots and legacy. I just reminded you. A comfortable silence settled between them as they sipped their coffee, watching the farm come alive. In the barn, Buckingham would be waiting for his morning apple. The sheep would be bleating impatiently for breakfast. The rhythms of the place had become as familiar to Xander as the code he'd once spent 18 hours a day writing. So what happens now? Clara finally asked, voicing the question they'd both been carefully avoiding. Xander set down his mug on the porch railing. My helicopter arrives at noon. That's not what I meant. I know. He took a deep breath. Clara, these past weeks have been the most real, the most grounded I've felt since, maybe ever. Being here with you, working this land, it's changed my perspective on everything. But you have a company to run, Clara supplied. A life waiting for you back in the city. Yes, Xander acknowledged. Reed Tech employs thousands of people. I can't simply walk away from that responsibility. Clara nodded, her expression carefully neutral, though Xander had learned to read the subtle signs of disappointment in the set of her shoulders. But, he continued, reaching for her hand, that doesn't mean things have to go back to exactly the way they were. What are you saying, Xander? He smiled, drawing her closer. I'm saying that Bennett Farm isn't the only thing that's gotten under my skin. There's this stubborn, brilliant farmer who seems to have claimed permanent real estate in my thoughts. A blush crept up Clara's cheeks. Is that so? It is. Xander brushed a strand of hair from her face. And I'm not ready to say goodbye to her. Not today, not tomorrow. Not ever, if I can help it. Clara's eyes widened slightly. Xander, we live in completely different worlds. Your life is board meetings and coding labs. Mine is fence posts and hay bales. True, he agreed. But do they have to be mutually exclusive? He took both her hands in his. I've been thinking about this a lot, Clara. What if there was a way to bridge those worlds instead of choosing between them? What did you have in mind? Clara asked, caution and hope warring in her voice. Reed Tech has been looking to develop a rural technology initiative, bringing high-speed internet and digital literacy programs to farming communities. It was always just another corporate social responsibility box to tick, but now... He squeezed her hands gently. Now I understand how technology could actually serve places like this, rather than replace them. Clara's expression remained guarded. And where does that leave us? With options, Xander replied. I need to be in the city sometimes, that's unavoidable. But I don't need to be there all the time. Modern companies are more flexible than ever. You're suggesting, what? Weekends on the farm? Holiday visits? Clara pulled her hands away. That's not enough, Xander. This place needs full-time commitment. I need... She stopped herself. What do you need, Clara? Xander pressed gently. She looked up at him, vulnerability plain in her eyes. I need someone who understands that this farm isn't just a place or a job. It's my heritage, my future. I can't leave it, even for... She swallowed. Even for someone I've come to care about. I'm not asking you to leave, Xander said. I'm suggesting we find a path forward. Together. Before Clara could respond, the kitchen door swung open, and Ellie emerged onto the porch. There you two are. Breakfast is nearly ready, and those animals won't feed themselves. She glanced between them, reading the tension. Though I suppose I could handle the morning chores if you need another moment. No, Mom. We're coming, Clara assured her, grateful for the interruption. Let me just grab my boots. As Clara disappeared inside, Ellie fixed Xander with a knowing look. She's afraid, you know, she said without preamble. Of what? Of believing in something that might not last. Ellie leaned against the porch pillar. Clara's seen too many people leave this valley. Friends, neighbors, even her father. The farm keeps her grounded, gives her certainty in an uncertain world. I'm not planning to leave her, Ellie, Xander said firmly. Intentions are wonderful things, Ellie replied with gentle wisdom. But life has a way of testing them. The question isn't whether you plan to stay. It's whether you're willing to fight to stay, even when it gets difficult. Before Xander could respond, Clara returned, and they headed to the barn for one last morning of chores together. The hours passed too quickly. By mid-morning, Xander had packed his belongings. The designer clothes that now felt strangely foreign after weeks in flannel and denim. His laptop, once practically an extension of his body, seemed like an artifact from another life. Clara had been quiet all morning, going about her tasks with methodical precision. The easy closeness of previous days had been replaced by a careful distance that ached more than any physical separation could have. At 11:30, they walked together to the landing area where Xander's helicopter would arrive, the same field where they'd first met, coming full circle. So, Clara said, hands shoved in her pockets. Back to your real life. This felt pretty real to me, Xander replied softly. Clara bit her lip, then seemed to come to a decision. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn pocket knife with a wooden handle. This was my grandfather's, she said, holding it out to him. He always said it was the most important tool on the farm, could fix anything from fence wire to fishing line. Xander took it carefully, recognizing the significance of the gesture. Clara, I can't take this. I want you to, she insisted. To remember that sometimes the simplest tools are the most valuable. That complexity isn't always progress. I'll keep it with me, Xander promised, tucking it into his pocket. Always. In the distance, the distinctive sound of helicopter. Blades cut through the morning quiet. Clara's shoulders stiffened at the sound. Faster than I expected, she murmured. As the sleek black machine appeared on the horizon, Xander turned to face her fully. Clara, I need to say something before this arrives. She looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears she was too proud to release. Don't make promises you can't keep, Xander. Not to me. I'm not, he assured her. I'm making a promise I fully intend to keep. This past month has shown me what I've been missing. Connection. Purpose. The kind of peace I never found in boardrooms or coding marathons. The helicopter was drawing closer, its shadow dancing across the field between them. I love you, Clara. Bennett, Xander said, the words both surprising and inevitable. I love your stubbornness and your strength. I love how you talk to horses and worry about old trees. I love that you saw through my corporate armor to the person I'd forgotten how to be. Clara's composure finally cracked, a single tear trailing down her cheek. Xander, don't. I'm not asking you to leave the farm, he continued. I would never ask that, but I am asking for a chance to build something between your world and mine, something real and lasting. The helicopter was now circling, overhead, preparing to land. How? Clara asked, her voice barely audible above the rotor noise. How could this possibly work? Xander reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded document. This is a proposal, not a corporate one, though it is printed on ReedTech letterhead, force of habit, but a personal one. He handed it to Clara. It outlines a new ReedTech rural technology initiative, headquartered right here in Willow Creek. We'd bring high-speed internet infrastructure to the valley, create digital literacy programs for farming communities, develop agricultural technology that actually serves small farms rather than replacing them. Clara scanned the document, eyes widening. You want to build a tech center here? In the old mill building downtown, Xander confirmed. It's been empty for years, according to your mother. We'd create jobs, partner with local farms for pilot programs. He paused. And I'd be the on-site director. Living here, working from here, with frequent trips to headquarters as needed, of course. The helicopter touched down, sending dust swirling around them, an echo of Xander's arrival. 4 weeks earlier. This is real? Clara asked, still clutching the proposal. Not just a grand gesture to make leaving easier? It's real, Xander assured her. The board approved it yesterday. I used the library internet again. Turns out saving your company from inadvertently contributing to predatory development earns you some goodwill. Clara's expression transformed, hope blooming across her features. You'd really do this? Move to Willow Creek? In a heartbeat, Xander said, stepping closer despite the rotor wash. I found something here I never knew I was missing, Clara. Not just you, though you're the heart of it, but a connection to place, to purpose, to reality, away from the digital abstraction I've lived in for so long. He took her hands in his. I'm not saying it will be simple. We're different people, from different worlds, but I believe what we've found is worth fighting for, worth compromising for, worth building a new path for. Clara's response was to close the distance between them, rising on her toes to press her lips to his, in a kiss that contained all the hope, fear, and possibility of new beginnings. When they finally separated, the helicopter pilot was pointedly looking in another direction, pretending not to notice the emotional scene playing out. Is that a yes? Xander asked, his forehead resting against hers. Clara smiled, the full, unguarded smile that he'd worked so hard to earn over these weeks. It's a, let's try. One day at a time. That's all I'm asking for, Xander replied. One day at a time. He glanced at the waiting helicopter, then back to Clara. I do need to go back, temporarily. There's a transition to manage, projects, to delegate, an apartment to sublet. How long? 2 weeks max, Xander promised. Then I'll be back, with a better plan than even this one. He tapped the proposal she still held. And maybe with a more personal proposal, if that's not moving. Too fast. Clara's blush deepened. One day at a time, remember? Right, Xander agreed with a smile. Though I should warn you, I'm known for aggressive timelines when I'm passionate about a project. Clara laughed, the sound clear and bright against the helicopter's mechanical roar. Some things can't be rushed, city boy. Farms operate on their own schedule. Then I'll learn patience, Xander replied. I have a good teacher, after all. With one last kiss, a promise sealed between them, Xander picked up his bag and walked toward the helicopter. At the door, he turned back. Clara stood in the field, hair blowing in the rotor wash, hand raised in both farewell and welcome. Behind her stretched the Bennett farm, rolling pastures, ancient oaks. A life lived in harmony with the land. A life he was choosing to join, however unconventionally. As the helicopter lifted off, Xander kept his eyes fixed on Clara until she was just a speck in the landscape below. But unlike when he'd arrived, his gaze wasn't filled with disdain for the rural scenery. It was filled with anticipation for returning to it. To her. His hand closed around the pocket knife in his jacket. A simple tool. A profound gift. In his other pocket, his phone buzzed with dozens of notifications. The digital world already, clamoring for his attention. But for the first time in his adult life, Alexander Reed knew with perfect clarity that there were more important connections than Wi-Fi, more valuable assets than stock options, and that the most rewarding interface wasn't on any screen. It was in the eyes of a stubborn farmer who had taught him to see the world, and himself, anew. 2 weeks. It would feel like an eternity. But then, the best harvests were always worth the wait. 6 months later, the converted mill building hummed with activity as Reed Tech Rural Technologies celebrated its official opening. Local farmers, mingled with tech specialists, examining demonstrations of water management systems designed specifically for small-scale agriculture. In the central courtyard, under strings of twinkling lights, Xander stood at a small podium, Clara at his side. "When I came to Willow Creek 6 months ago, I thought I was serving a sentence," he told the gathered crowd. "Turns out, I was being given a gift." His hand found Clara's, their fingers intertwining naturally. This initiative isn't about bringing big city technology to modernize rural communities. It's about creating technology that actually serves the needs of the people who feed us all. Technology that preserves traditions rather than replacing them. Applause rippled through the audience, loudest from the assembled farmers who had initially viewed the project with deep skepticism. Later, as twilight settled over the valley, Xander and Clara slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand toward Bennett Farm. They had renovated the old gamekeeper's cottage on the property, a compromise that gave them privacy while keeping Clara connected to the daily operations of the farm. "Happy?" Xander asked, as they crested the familiar hill overlooking the farmhouse. Clara's answer was a radiant smile and a squeeze of his hand. Who would have thought the arrogant billionaire who couldn't tell a sheep from a goat would end up revolutionizing agi-tech from a converted mill in the middle of nowhere? Who would have thought the stubborn farmer who mocked my Italian leather shoes would agree to marry him? Xander countered, his thumb brushing over the simple engagement, ring on her finger, a band of polished wood inlaid with a single diamond, as unique as their union. "We're still an unlikely pair," Clara admitted as they approached the cottage, warm light glowing from its windows. "The unlikeliest," Xander agreed, pulling her close. "And yet, somehow, the most obvious in the world." As stars appeared above, Bennett Farm, technology and tradition found their balance in the embrace of two. People who had discovered that the most innovative solution was often the simplest, following one's heart, wherever it might lead. Even if it led a billionaire to muck stables, or a farmer to dream in code.